The book of Jonah, and we're going to be preaching out of or looking to see in the first 3 verses what the Lord would have for us out of Jonah. And I love the story of Jonah. Jonah ran from God, and he ended up in a storm at sea. And I was in the Navy for 4 years, so I can kind of relate to Jonah, being in a storm at sea, and the guys, fearing for their life and throwing Jonah overboard. And, while I worked in the Navy, and then after the Navy, I worked on boats and out in the ocean a lot, and seen all kinds of different types of whales, blue whales, and I think the blue whale is the biggest whale in the world. And I mean, that whale was probably like 10 buses long. I mean, it was huge. And I don't think a blue whale can swallow a human being. I'm not for sure. I didn't look at that to see the science evidence behind that. But they're huge. And I can't imagine being in the belly of a blue whale. I feel like, it'd be pretty terrible, or any whale for that matter. So when I'm reading Jonah, to me, my imagination goes wild. And I think it's a great story in the Bible. And, just how God shows that even through our rebellion to Him, He can still do great things. And, when I was growing up and pastors would preach on Jonah, or my dad would preach on Jonah, I always knew immediately when they started, it's like, don't be like Jonah. Jonah was not an example of a good prophet, and he's not. But whenever I started reading through Jonah a while back, I started thinking in my mind, there are many times in my life, and I think many times in your life, that you could think back where you were just like Jonah, where God maybe told you to do something, or He put on your heart to do something, whether it's to witness to someone or to talk to someone, and we said, nope, not going to do it. So if you would go with me to Jonah Jonah chapter 1, verse 1. Sorry, we're going to read the first 3 verses. And it says, Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Dear Lord, thank you so much for allowing me to be here tonight. Dear Lord, thank you for this church. Thank you for how kind and everyone was here. Dear Lord, I feel completely welcome here, dear Lord. And I just thank you so much for all that you're doing in our lives, dear Lord. And I just pray as we look at your word and look at your scripture, dear Lord, that you would give us something that would help motivate every single one of us, Lord, to go out and do something for you. And I know it's not my words, Lord, or the pastor's words, or any of our words that we preach, dear Lord, but it's your word that changes our hearts and changes our minds, dear Lord. And I pray that you just use the words in your book, dear Lord, that it would change every single one of us and motivate us more to tell others about you, dear Lord, and be more like you. In your name, amen. Now, I remember when I was I think 16 years old, and you probably remember, I was probably a little troublemaker, but I think I was about 13 years old. My dad went down to the store, the AT&T store right around the corner from where we lived, and I remember he got himself a cell phone. And I remember being so excited when he got that cell phone because they were just coming out, and they were the new and coolest piece of technology. And I remember he went down and he got the cell phone from AT&T, and he came back home, and I remember, the thing was almost like, it wasn't really like a cell phone. It was like, more like a big red brick that you hung on the side of your belt, and you needed a belt to hold it up because it was so big and so heavy, and, you probably walked with a limp a little bit because, it hung down. But I remember he went and he got that cell phone, and he came back up, and I was like, man, my dad is the coolest dad in the world. He has a cell phone. Not everyone has a cell phone, but my dad has a cell phone. And I just remember thinking, man, he's so cool. And waiting to, get my own cell phone. I'm like, one day I'll be as cool as my dad and I'll get a cell phone. And at that time in my mind, it's only doctors or lawyers had cell phones. So my dad was way up there. Now I know he wasn't that cool and cell phones weren't that cool, but in my mind at that age, it was an awesome thing. And I remember later on when I was 16, one of my friends got a cell phone, and I was like, Mom, can I get a cell phone? And she was like, no, you don't need a cell phone. You'll stay awake all night talking on the phone to who knows who, and you don't need one. So then I just waited till I was 18 because, once you turn 18, you're an adult now. You can do what you want. My mom and dad can't tell me what to do. The total didn't work out that well, but that's what I thought in my mind, And so anyways, I turned 18, and I went down and I got a cell phone, and luckily for me, my parents didn't get mad about it or, ground me or anything like that for it. But, I got a cell phone, and I thought I was the coolest person in the world with my cell phone. And it was even cooler than my dad's phone because it would flip open and flip shut, and I could take a picture with this cell phone. I mean, I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. And I remember when I got it, I'd wear the construction pants with the hammer loop on it where you could put your hammer, which doesn't really work. I don't know why they put that loop so far down there because you always bang it on your knee. But, and then you had the other the pocket for, I guess, nails or something like that, or your tape measure or whatever, But I would always wear, construction pants because, I thought I was a construction worker. And, but I would hang my cell phone on that loop there. And, man, I thought I was like the coolest person ever. And I made sure and hung it on the outside so everybody could see that this guy right here, he has a cell phone. And I'd never put it on silent unless I was in church, because when it rang, I wanted everyone to hear it and know that someone's calling this guy. Now, literally no one ever called me. It was probably a huge waste of money in buying it. But I thought I was cool, and it was worth feeling that cool to have a cell phone. But now it's like, 15 years later or whatever it is, and I have a cell phone, and I'm just not that excited about having a cell phone anymore. Like most of the time I leave it on silent, and I'm like, I just don't want anyone calling me. I don't want to be bothered. And I remember one time we were working out on the ocean, and I dropped it out of my pocket and dropped it in the ocean. And, I took my time getting a new cell phone because for a full week, my boss couldn't call me to tell me to come into work early. He couldn't call me in on my day off, and people couldn't call me asking me for things. I mean, it was peaceful and fantastic. But, we get calls all the time on our cell phones. I was thinking, I get calls all the time asking, like, would you like to extend the warranty on your car? Before I bought this car for deputation because I needed a good car. Before that, I had a Toyota T100, which was before the Tacoma or the Tundra came out. It was like an old truck. It had over 200,000 miles on it. And people would still call to extend my warranty on my car. And I'm like, I'll take it if you'll give it to me. But I knew they weren't going to give it to me as soon as they found out the year, make, and model and the miles on that thing. We get cars for, a lower mortgage rate or, all kinds of things. People trying to sell us stuff. All the time we get calls on our phone. Or maybe some of you have kids that are in college, and when they call, they're calling for money. They don't call for nothing else. We don't call our parents, unless we need something. Or maybe grandkids that call for money or, whatever. They need a ride somewhere to get from point A to point B. We get calls all the time on our phone. But a lot of times, if you're like me, when you get a call, you don't answer it. And I have a sister, you probably know, Trixie. She lives, I just said her name, but it's all right. Hopefully she doesn't get too mad at me. But, she lived in Guam for a while. And when she calls, I'm like, I am always too busy to answer her call. Because we could talk on the phone for 2 hours, and I'll not say one word. And to her, it's a great conversation. I'm just like, I just wasted 2 hours. But, so when she calls, I'm like, I'm going to put that on silent and stick it in my pocket. But, we get calls all the time throughout the day, throughout the week of people wanting something, boss wanting something, kids wanting something, someone trying to sell us something. And many times when we get those calls, if you're like me, you put your phone on silent and put it back in your pocket. Or you have your phone on silent already and you don't even hear it calling. But many times, God calls us throughout the week, just like he called Jonah to go to Nineveh. But most of the time, if you're like me, a lot of times you probably put your phone on silent. Or when God calls and he speaks to you in a still, small voice, we're too busy doing something else besides listening to what the Lord has for us. And God has called all of us to do something. He has something for every single person sitting in this room. I think of how he called Jonah, and Jonah was probably pretty comfortable where he's at. And I just, I have a little bit of a wild imagination, so I just imagine Jonah, he's over, he's a Hebrew, so he's over here in, Hebrew land or, with his Israeli buddies, and he's just hanging out, and he's probably in his tent with his, pet camel outside, and, probably has a good, big screen TV that he watches Netflix on, or Hulu or the news or Fox News or whatever it is, or CNN, or whatever all the fake newses are, he's probably hanging out in the Hebrew land watching TV, just chilling, enjoying his life. And then God comes down and says, Jonah, arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, for their wickedness has come up before me. And there's a city over here in Nineveh that is so wicked, so evil, that their wickedness has come up before God. And God says, I need someone to go do something, to tell them about Christ. But Jonah is just like, nope, I don't want to do it. But God calls every single one of us to do something, just like he called Jonah to do something. And I think of the Great Commission in the Bible in Matthew, in the last book of Matthew, and I'll look it up real quick so I don't misquote it, but he tells all of us to go into the world and preach the gospel. In Matthew 28:19, it says, "Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen." And he also gives us the great command, which is, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might." And the second is like unto it, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." I mean, that is what God has called us to do. Every single one of us sitting in the room, He's called us to spread the gospel, to get people baptized, and to disciple them. And then the great commandment, love the Lord thy God and love your neighbor as yourself. And it says all the commandments hang on that one commandment. Love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And really, you can't do the Great Commission without loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. You can't love others without fulfilling the Great Commission. They all go hand in hand, one with the other. That is what God has called us to do. And I know, everyone can't go to the mission field, or everyone can't be a pastor, or there are all things that we can do and can't do. But God has called us all to something. And one's not more important than the other or less important than the other. They're all equally important. I remember for the longest time in my church in San Diego, I would go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and do everything at the church that I could possibly be involved in. But I remember one time I walked in the bathroom and it was just really dirty. Someone had gone in there and messed it up. And so I went in there and one other guy was with me and we cleaned it up. That's just as important as going to the mission field or being a pastor. I mean, everything is equally important. And God has called us equally to spread the gospel. And that could mean serving God or being called of God in so many different ways. It could be just being called when you're at the grocery store and you see the clerk there that doesn't know the gospel and telling them about the gospel, or handing them a tract. Or maybe your friends or your family that don't know Christ, it could be just telling them about Christ. Or it could be coming to the church and helping in the church clean or do things at the church, or being an usher or helping with the treasurer, counting the money, or being a deacon, or whatever it is in the church. God has something for every single one of us. Or maybe teaching a Sunday school class in the church. I think of all the Sunday school teachers I had over the course of my life, and I can't believe they put up with me or babysitting me. I can't believe he put up with me growing up, We can have such a tremendous impact on people. But God has called us all to do something, and it could be so many different things and come in so many different ways. God has a purpose for every single person here. But like Jonah, a lot of times God has a purpose for us, but yet we have an excuse not to do it. And I was reading through Jonah and reading the story of Jonah, and I thought, man, Jonah was the prophet of God, the man God chose to do his work. And God called him to go to Nineveh, but yet he ran. And I think about Jonah, how he went way out of his way to get away from doing what God wanted him to do. I mean, he went down into the boat, and they went out to sea, and I think of the storm out there, and I think of the sailors that were with him going out to sea, and, I just imagine them being these big, burly, muscular sailormen, they're used to being out at sea. They're used to, pulling in the sails and throwing out anchors and pulling anchors and rowing the ship. And, I just imagine they probably hadn't shaved in, weeks, and they probably smelled like the sea. And I just imagine their arms, just being like the size of my torso, just these massively strong men that just were men of the sea. And they go out to sea and this big storm arises, and they are such strong men, but they're so scared of a storm. They're like, Lord, please save us. And Jonah's just out there, and he's willing to face this storm that could have killed all of them just to run from God. When I was reading through it, I was thinking of, many times in the Navy when we would have storms that would come up, and we were talking earlier about the Gulf of Mexico, and there was a Hurricane Ike that was coming in. I think it was 2009 or 8 or something like that, and we were out at sea, and we were trying to race the hurricane back into shore. And a minesweeper, which is what I worked on, they only go 14 knots, which is about 15 miles an hour. I mean, I can ride a bicycle faster than this ship can go. And the hurricane's coming in at 12 knots or something like that, or 10 knots. And so we're just a day ahead of it, full steam ahead, ready to get out the oars, and paddle on the side of the ship to get back to shore safely. But I remember the waves and the sea came up, and, some of those waves were as high as the ship, and they would just come over the ship and just completely just cover the thing in water. I remember the time being so scared, gripping the helm as I'm steering it, trying to keep the course, praying, Lord, if you help us make it to shore safe, like I will serve you for the rest of my life. You know, and I don't know if you I try to bargain with God all the time, and I know you can't really bargain with God. God does what He does. He is sovereign. But now I'm praying like, Lord, please, if we make it to shore safely, I will read my Bible. I will serve you. I'll read Proverbs every day, the book of Proverbs, or the Proverbs of the day every day, if you just allow us to make it to shore safe. But I just imagine these guys, they're out at sea, like that, and then they get thrown over, or they throw Jonah over, and he sits in the belly of a whale for 3 days. And I just imagine, Jonah's in the belly of a whale for 3 days. What would cause a guy to risk his life to sit in the belly of a whale for 3 days just so he didn't have to do what God told him to do? And then I started reading about Nineveh and started realizing very quickly why Jonah would go through that great extent not to do what God told him to do. The Ninevites were known for being a very, very wicked, wicked people. I mean, it says in the Bible, they were so wicked that their wickedness came up before God. I mean, they had to be one of the wickedest cities in the world at that time for it to come up before God over all the other cities. But they used to go into places and pillage and plunder and destroy cities, and they would lock people in buildings and then set the buildings on fire and let the buildings burn with the people inside. And I was reading how they would do all kinds of other things, and one of the things that I read that just blew my mind is they would take people and they'd wrap them in fresh leather and tie it up, and then they would get it wet and leave it in the sun, and as the leather would dry, it would slowly suffocate the person to death. And they were not known for loving the Hebrews or for loving Christians at all. And I just imagine when God told Jonah to go to Nineveh, he was, it says in his mind, he didn't want them to be saved. He was upset that he knew God would have mercy on them. And so I was reading it, I'm like, man, what would make a guy want the Ninevites to go to hell that bad? And after reading about the Ninevites, I realized, man, Jonah must have been in fear for his life. One, that they would kill him. I mean, he was a Hebrew. One, they clearly were wicked people and did not like Christians. And the other is Jonah kind of felt a little bit of a grudge towards them. He probably knew people that had been killed by them, and he did not want them to be saved. And when I was reading that, I was thinking like, man, what would that be similar to in our day and age? And I started thinking of 9/11 and how, I was 13 years old, and I saw as the towers crashed. And I saw as people jumped out the top of the towers to their death. And one image in my mind I've never forgotten it on TV as someone was running as the towers were collapsing and the dust was rising up behind him, and there's nothing but terror and fear in his eyes as he ran. And I was thinking, what if God called me to go be a missionary to the Taliban? First, I'd be thinking, Lord, they're going to kill me as soon as I get there. They don't like Americans. They don't like Christians. And two, they deserve what they're going to get. I mean, they came over here on our soil and killed innocent people, Lord. They deserve to die and go to hell. And I know we all, every single one of us, deserve to die and we deserve to go to hell. We don't deserve the grace of the Lord. And as hard as it would be to go to the Taliban, I truly hope that all of them would get saved. I mean, it would change the world if they did. But I thought it would be no different if God asked me to go there as if he asked Jonah to go to Nineveh. And then I started thinking in my own life when the Lord was calling me to be a missionary. And, I had all kinds of excuses not to be a missionary. Like, I'm super introvert, and, standing up in front of talking in front of people and preaching is wasn't my idea of fun. And I always it just blew my mind how courageous pastors are to get up every Sunday and preach. It was one of those things I was just like, man, Lord, I can't do that. And I had all these excuses in my mind of, man, Lord, why I don't know how to do that. I don't speak the language. It's a country all the way across the world, all these excuses in my mind. But then I started thinking about the excuses I have every single day to not do what the Lord wants me to do. And as we saw earlier, God has something special for every single one of us to do. And I think there's probably something that God's working on your heart, someone to witness to, someone to talk to in this room right now. But we probably have an excuse not to do it. And I was thinking, even when I was serving in my church, I was going Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Saturday visitation, and then if we had a work day on Saturday, I would go, and Thursday visitation, and I was helping with the youth ministry and with counting the money, and everything I could find I would help with. But they kept asking me to be an usher. And I was like, nope, I don't want to be an usher. And really the sorriest excuse that I have for not being an usher is, in order to be an usher, you had to wear a tie. That was the requirements. Now, they changed the rules since then, which I'm like, why'd you change it after I was an usher? But you had to wear a tie, and I hate wearing ties. I mean, I don't mind them now. I wear them all the time, so I'm used to it. But I'm like, man, no, I can't be an usher because I have to wear a tie. But I think if we think in our minds of all the excuses that we have for not doing what God wants us to do, they're as pretty lame as, not wanting to wear a tie. And they're nothing in comparison to Jonah's excuses. I mean, I'm thinking about witnessing to someone. It's like we're in too big of a hurry to get home to do something. Or we're going through the grocery store line and there's people behind us and we're like, Lord, I don't have time to hand them a tract to tell them about Christ. Or our friends or our family that we know we should witness to that, and it's my own sins too, that sometimes we're like, what are they going to think of me? If I witness to my family and then it's going to make Thanksgiving and Christmas very awkward and they're not going to like me or want to be around me. Or even coming to church and helping clean or teach a Sunday school class or just discipling people as the Lord tells us to do. And maybe thinking like, man, Lord, I don't have time for that. I already got so much stuff on my plate that I can't do what you have commanded me to do. We all have, excuses for everything and why we can't do it. But with those excuses and not doing what God tells us to do are great consequences or rewards. When we read in Jonah and we turn over to chapter 3 and verse number 5, it says, "So the people of Nineveh believed God and proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth from the greatest of them even to the least of them." And then the very last verse in the book says, "And should not I spare Nineveh, that great city, wherein are more than 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, and also much cattle." When we obey God, there can be a great reward for obeying God. I think of Jonah and, God told Jonah to go to Nineveh. I mean, without a shadow of doubt, it's written in black and white. He told Jonah to go to Nineveh. And Jonah did not want to go. He ran from God. And God pretty much forced his hand into going. I mean, he had no choice to whether sit in the belly of the well for longer or go tell Nineveh of the gospel. Tell Nineveh to repent. And I just imagine, God told Jonah to go. And, I just imagine Jonah when he went to Nineveh, it was probably like, I think of when I was a little kid and my mom would tell me to go clean my room. And, I think I did not want to clean my room because I knew it was a mess. I knew it was going to take a while to clean it. And I keep my room in perfect condition now, I promise. But, when I was little, it's like, go clean your room. I'm like, I don't want to go clean my room. But I would go clean my room anyways because I knew the punishment of what my mom was going to do to me was a lot worse than going and cleaning my room. So many times I'd, put my hands in my pockets and kind of, snort a little bit and stomp off to my room to go clean my room and make sure that everyone knew that I did not want to go clean my room, but I was only doing it because I had to. And I just imagine, when Jonah went to Nineveh, when he obeyed God finally and went, that's how he went. I mean, it just says he went through the city for 2 days and he just said, believe in God or God's going to destroy you. I mean, he didn't come up with a beautiful sermon or nothing. He just told them straight how it was. There's nothing fancy about it. But he had great response when he went to Nineveh. And one thing I think about this is, it doesn't matter. Like when God's in it, there's going to be a great response. There's going to be hundreds of people saved. God's going to do a great work whenever God is in it, regardless of us. In each of our lives, when God tells us to do something, there can be a great response. And whether we obey God or disobey God can determine whether thousands of people are saved or whether thousands of people die and spend eternity in hell. And I was thinking of a story that my mom told me a few months ago, and she told me a story about a little girl that was in Illinois sitting on the side of the road praying and asking God that he would send someone to her that could take her to church. All she wanted to do was God to send someone to take her to church. And this little girl had grown up in Florida, and her dad was an alcoholic and would come home at night sometimes and beat her mother. And then at other times she'd come home when you put all the kids in the car and drive around town driving dangerously, drunk, and almost killing all of them. And she grew up in a terrible, broken home with lots of fighting, lots of violence, and just a terrible home. But the little girl had found a little Nazarene church down the street that she had gone to church to. And I know there's a lot of stuff that maybe I don't agree with the Nazarenes, or maybe you don't agree with the Nazarenes, or maybe you do, but the one thing about this Nazarene church is they preached that salvation was by grace through faith. And this little girl went to that church and she accepted Christ as her personal Savior. And she used to go to the church every single Sunday because it was only a few blocks from where she lived. But eventually the little girls, her parents ended up getting divorced, and now there's a single mom trying to raise 4 kids, her sister, and her 2 brothers. And her grandmother in Illinois called and said, if you don't bring the kids up to Illinois and let me help take care of them, I'm going to try to take them away from you. And so the mom moved up to Illinois, and the 2 girls went to live with the grandmother, and the 2 boys were living with the mom, who was a single mom trying to take care of her kids. And the little girl would ask her mom to take her to church, and the mom would be like, no, I'm too busy. And she would go and ask her grandmother to take her to church, and her grandmother would be like, no, I'm too busy. And so one Sunday morning, she'd asked her mom to take her to church, and she wouldn't take her to church. So she started walking the 8 miles or 7 miles it was to her grandmother's house to ask her grandmother to take her to church. And she sat down on the side of the road and just started praying, like, God, please send someone to take me to church. And at that same moment, there happened to be a lady named Pat Conway driving down the street. And Pat Conway stopped and asked the little girl, like, what are you doing? And the little girl, why are you out here all by yourself? And the little girl told Pat Conway, well, I just want to go to church. And Pat Conway said, well, I go to church every single time the doors are open. Would you like to go with me? And the little girl obviously was overjoyed and said, yes, I would love to go to church with you. And so Pat Conway started picking up this little girl every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, and taking her to church. And eventually Pat Conway came with her husband over to try to witness to the little girl's mom and tell her about salvation. And in the course of the conversation, Pat Conway asked if the little girl could come and live with her. And so the mom said, yeah, if she wants to go live with you, she can go live with you. And the grandmother said, yeah, if she wants to go live with you, she can go live with you. And the little girl, even though the parents were trying to, the mom was trying to do what was best for her, the little girl felt a little rejected that her mom didn't care enough, that she would just let her go live with someone else. And she felt a little rejected by her grandmother too. But the little girl still went and lived with Pat Conway, who took her in. And Pat Conway took her to church, every single service. And then Pat Conway enrolled her in the school there, in a little Baptist, a school they had in the little Baptist church. And she kept going to school all through high school, and eventually graduated and went to college. And then while that little girl was in college, she met my dad. And then they moved to Parsons, Kansas when I was 4 years old. And I think of the impact of my mom's had on all the kids in Kansas. And I remember when I was little, we'd go around through all the bus route and stop and talk to all the little kids that would come on the bus. And my mom would witness to them and tell them about the gospel and take them candy or whatever and just talk to them. And be a mom to all those little girls and all those little kids that might have come from broken homes or homes where their parents didn't really love them. And I think of also the impact she's had on my life and all my brothers and sisters' lives. There's 9 of us in our family. There's 5 boys and 4 girls. I just think of the impact she had on every single one of us kids and how she impacted, all of those kids in Kansas. And I think, every single person I've ever been able to witness to or impact in my life, and every single church I'm able to start at Columbia, or little boys or girls that are able to come to church in Columbia that I'm able to witness to and disciple, or people that I'm able to train for the Lord's work, will all be because of my mom and her impact on me. But it even goes farther back to Pat Conway, who was driving down the street one day and wasn't in too much of a hurry to get home to rest, relax, or make dinner or watch TV, and she took the time out of her day to talk to one little girl and the change that it made in the world. And I think God has something for each and every one of us. You may be driving down the road this week and you get a call from the Lord saying, hey, talk to that little girl and tell her about the gospel, or take her in. Or maybe God, is saying, hey, go to Nineveh, that great wicked city, and tell them about Christ. Or, like me, maybe saying, hey, go to Columbia and tell people in Columbia about Christ. Or he may just be saying, go to church and teach a Sunday school class and invest in the kids at your church or the people at your church. Or go to church and vacuum the floor or clean the bathrooms or, be an usher or whatever it is. God has something for every single one of us to do. No matter who we are, no matter how old we are, how young we are, what our background is, God has something for us to do. But in order to be able to do it, in order to be able to change the world, in order to do something great for Christ, when God calls us, we have to pick up the phone and we have to answer the call. Pastor?